There's not only no need to fear a big build out of AI and data centers, it should be embraced. The more load you have on a system, the more ratepayers there are to socialize the cost of the fixed cost of the system.
All right. All right, let's just get into it. Secretary Danley, I guess high level, as we get into the conversation here, I'm wondering, how have the Department of Energy's priorities shifted from the last administration, both in general and then specifically in the context of nuclear energy?
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me. Probably the most important shift in policy is the recognition that we had been following some pretty misguided policies for years. As soon as the president took office, he declared an energy emergency, largely in recognition of the fact that we had been systematically replacing reliable, dispatchable baseload with less reliable intermittents. Over the last however many years, prices of electricity have gone up in many parts of the country, fairly drastically in some cases, and a lot of this was driven by those bad policies. The states that have renewable portfolio standards saw a much more eccentric increase in electricity rates. And so the objective now, under the President's vision for energy dominance, is to ensure affordable, reliable, secure energy for everybody. We're talking about electricity, but in fact that's energy of all forms. And what we need to do is get back to having as much of the conditions set to encourage the development of reliable baseload that is dispatchable and available 24/7. That would be hydro, coal, gas, and of course nuclear. And so when it comes to nuclear power, the President had a very ambitious set of executive orders that was basically going to kickstart the next iteration of nuclear power development. The U.S. has the largest fleet of nuclear power plants in the world, and we have immense expertise both in the Department of Energy and more broadly developing and building them, though over the last couple decades it's tailed off. And so the objective here is to get as much nuclear power developed of as many types as possible as quickly as we can, because the nuclear power renaissance that we're going to be seeing very shortly is going to unlock another type of that dispatchable generation very quickly.
I guess before we get a little further into nuclear, I have just one more question for you. I mean, cost of energy is spiking again. It seems like a big part of that is data centers. Certainly they have been thrust into the center of the discourse. Super polarizing, extremely hated on the far left, I think also kind of hated on the right at times. But artificial intelligence, this major strategic asset for the country, obviously, Trump agrees. How do you guys think about threading the needle between that popular anger and just the need to produce the energy?
It really doesn't matter what the load is that you're trying to serve. The fact that it happens to be data centers or AI in a particular case isn't fundamental. In fact, there's not only no need to fear a big build out of AI and data centers, it should be embraced. The more load you have on a system, the more ratepayers there are to socialize the cost of the fixed cost of the system across, so that will effectively reduce the rates for the ratepayers universally. You do, however, have to match the load that comes on with gen to actually serve it. But as long as you have wise policy that meets load with gen, you will actually find that the more things are built out, the lower the cost goes, right? The most expensive place in the world to have electricity is at the top of Mount Everest, where you have to drag your fuel and your generator up to the top, right? The cheapest place to have it is in an industrialized, developed country that has a large store of generators and a large amount of load that it's serving in order to socialize the costs of transmission and distribution and the like across everybody. So the affordability is key. It's absolutely critical, and we're focused on it. And the way to do that is to have this wise policy of getting the right kind of generation developed.
So are you guys, are you planning ahead for the future of energy infrastructure? And how has the maybe strategy changed over the last couple of years?
Well, certainly the objective is to ensure that we have not just the generators, but also we reconductor as much of the transmission system for the lowest price and highest transfer capacity, that we develop as much of the internal primary energy source production in America as we can, and at the same time employ the abundance of energy we have in the United States as a benefit to our friends and allies across the world, especially through LNG exports.
All right, Scott. For years, I think it has been popular to sort of almost LARP in the nuclear reactor space. You know, everyone wants to say they're building a new nuclear reactor, in the startup space at least. You identified a problem that was maybe less sexy, but it seems a lot more important to me at least, which is back in 2013, we lost our capacity, Americans lost our capacity to enrich nuclear uranium. And it turns out that's a very key aspect of running a reactor. My first question just on that topic is, how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it started with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it's been going on for a while. It's been a bipartisan thing to just shut down enrichment since the 90s. And it all began with, you know, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, we switched over to completely just free trade and allowing stuff to offshore, which was a theme across many different industries, just assuming that free trade would be reliable and always there. And so we shut down a sequence of plants that the government previously owned and that private companies ran. You know, we're now completely dependent on foreign countries, so about 20% from adversarial countries, 80% from Europe. And so we went from 86% of global enrichment in the 80s down to less than 1% today. So pretty much total shutdown over the course of like 20 plus years. And then here we are today, everything's switched. Everyone knows nuclear is the way that we're going to really scale the grid. But
the fuel is still...
The fuel, now we have no ability to...
Is this something that you guys think about at all? I mean,
yes.
Have you discussed the capacity issue? What are the discussions like on that side?
So in kicking off the nuclear renaissance, the DOE is engaged in every part of the value chain. So we're talking about manufacturing, workforce, right? Talent is something that has atrophied a bit over time, and that needs to be fixed. The design, the regulatory framework, right? We're in the middle of a very ambitious project the President set for us this last summer to bring as many new SMR prototype designs to criticality by July 4th. And as breathtaking and ambitious a plan as that was, we are on the road right now to seeing 3 or 4 of those reach criticality. That will reduce the regulatory complexity by having us, right? The DOE has been running nuclear reactors since its inception. We have a whole bunch of them, right? And when they're on our land, we're the regulatory authority, not the NRC. So we're going to give them the chop of the DOE for efficacy and safety, and then pass that off into the NRC process. But we're also trying to solve the manufacturing and fuel cycle problems, which are profound, right?
What are some of the bottlenecks that you think you're facing now on the private side developing nuclear enrichment?
Yeah, I mean...
uranium enrichment, I'm sorry.
Yeah, when we think of bottlenecks, it's either like, what are the bottlenecks to scale or what are the bottlenecks to just schedule, to just being online? On the online side, on the online date, it's really mostly driven by licensing. That's something the NRC is looking at right now and just assessing what's the right time frame to assess a license. That's a long pole in the tent. I'd say on scale, it's really just, okay, what are the supply chain?
Well, Secretary Danley, what are you guys thinking about licensing?
So you're talking about licensing at the NRC or at So we've been very robustly engaged with the NRC, talking through the process by which we're reaching all of these initial prototyping, both for the fuel pilot program and for the SMRs, and the entire objective of the Trump administration when it comes to this is to reduce regulatory barriers, right? Look, we have to remember what the function of government is. It is to set predictable, stable conditions in which innovation and private capital can be deployed with predictability so you actually know what the outcome is going to be on the other side, right? Not sacrificing any amount of the diligence necessary for safety, not sacrificing the inquiry that you're going into to make sure that these facilities run correctly and are functional and don't present public safety challenges, but to do it as quickly and predictably as you can within those constraints, and we're actively engaged on all the time. And by the way, on this subject of licensing, I mentioned that we were doing a set of pilot programs first. We still have the additional challenge of bringing the cost down once these technologies are proven to the satisfaction of the Department of Energy and the NRC. And so part of this also is thinking even further down the road, which is getting that order book established and finding the counterparties so that we can get the nth of a kind of each one of these facilities built so that we can routinize the production and bring the cost down. That's the key to everything.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to add to that before I move on, Scott?
Well, I think on that, like, you know, you're kind of saying, hey, maybe reactors don't matter so much, or everyone wants to do a reactor. I'd say most of the reactor companies that exist today started before people thought building a reactor was cool,
Right.
and it's still.
When I say reactor company, I'm talking about startups. I'm talking about not real companies.
Sure. But
About,
even those have been going for a few years. And
Yes, yeah.
half the battle on the cost side is going to be the reactor. The other half is the fuel. And so on the supply chain piece of just how do we scale, it's vertical integration. It's a lot of this you just have to do yourself. You have to figure out where the bottlenecks are. Where are you sole sourced on some part supplier that's only produced for the existing industry for decades and has never imagined growth of the industry? Those things you might need to internalize or find other paths.
Secretary Danley, I think, especially in the spirit of Hill and Valiant, one of the more interesting things about nuclear is I think all of the big projects require partnership between, maybe not all with private industry, but certainly every private endeavor requires partnership with the government. So it's like one of these interesting spaces where that's already been happening for a long time. What do you find to be the qualities of a fruitful relationship with a private company?
Oh, well, first of all, technical capacity and expertise. And by the way, you mentioned a second ago that these designs have been around for a long time. One of the most gratifying things is the amount of private capital that we've seen flow in recently. And so there is a first function of whether or not there is credibility in the design. That is sort of an immediate winnowing that has occurred. And then beyond that, a willingness to partner with the Department of Energy in which we provide them, as in the case of the pilot program, the security on our property, the regulatory oversight that allows them to operate and improve their technology, and then to the extent necessary, if there are market failures, support of one kind or another. But we've done everything we can. We've been very assiduous in not picking winners and losers here, right? The prototypes that we're looking at for SMRs have different fuels, different fuel cycles, different nameplate capacities, different operating characteristics. And the hope is that they can all make a run at the market. They will fill different market niches, and then the market will determine which ones are wanted for what application. And one of the great things about this is if you look at the bulk power system, there are different types of needs in different parts of the transmission system. And if you have a bunch of different designs, they will be able to inhabit those different niches much better than if we just said, okay, we're back in this one horse, we're going 100% in here. That's not the American way. And our objective here is to partner but not displace private capital, right? We do not ever want to be in a position, unless there is some profound market challenge, we do not want to displace private capital. We want the innovation of America to push this forward, and then the market to recognize the needs and have price signals induce that capital to flow.
I'm going to return to that in 1 second because I want to, the capital thing reminds me of China, but that's, I think, how we're going to cap this one. First, Scott, you've been at this for a bunch of years now, and you've had a bunch of success with the government. I'm wondering, what have the pain points been, or what maybe one pain point, and like what's a challenge that you're working on now that you're, I don't know, excited about with the government?
It has been just a ton of support is the main theme, and it's like, I mean, we can try and talk about pain points, but I'd say it's just been tailwinds for the most part, where it's like, you know, Senate Advance Act 2023 getting passed in 24, then you had Russian uranium ban, then you had the executive orders, which were some of the most pro-nuclear, you know, regulatory actions in decades.
They were great.
Yeah, it's like, and what you're talking about using DOE sites for all these reactors, that's one of the four. And so there were four huge executive orders, one on, you know, let's look at modern regulation at the NRC. Let's use the DOE as a licensing path. Let's use DOW as a potential site for things, and then let's rebuild the supply chain. So just an incredible amount of support. I'd say there really have not been new pain points. It's just a matter of like, how do we make faster progress? Our thing is always just pure speed. How do we safely get online to serve the market as quickly as we can? And part of the reason for that is if we don't, I think others will. And I think others look like China or other countries trying to get into it, leading to proliferation. So what we want to do is restore U.S. capability and lead on cost and scale so that the U.S. can be the place that enrichment's done and serve our allies that way.
Yeah, and can I make one more thing? There's another benefit of those executive orders. Not only did they set out new pathways, and not only were the goals really very ambitious, and they were, but they created an immense amount of enthusiasm. and an industry that has had, a fair number of years of challenges, right? The last power plant we built, Vogtle, was over budget and over schedule, or over time. That has chastened a lot of people for what should have been a rush to build more AP1000s. This has reinvigorated, these orders, I think, have completely reinvigorated the entire industry, and the excitement is palpable. And, in a dry, boring, bureaucratic job like being a deputy secretary, I will tell you one of the most fun parts of it is watching the fledgling companies getting off the ground, and the amount of excitement that is just palpable in the air. It's gratifying to see it, and I think it comes down to those orders and all of the follow through immediately afterwards.
So, Secretary Danley, a moment ago you mentioned one of the things you guys look for on the government side is private capital entering into the private companies. And Scott, you were just talking about China as a risk in terms of enrichment capacity. China, a big strategy is obviously it's centralized. It's a centralization of everything, and they are cornering markets not only because they see enrichment as a potentially a national asset, but as a strategic geopolitical asset. Their goal is to disrupt our own capacity to enrich uranium by affecting the supply. How do you guys? Earlier, you and I were talking about this, and you said, well, of course they can do that because they're not a free society. How, as a free society, do you think about competition with a nation that isn't, and can distort markets in this way?
Sure. I mean, there are occasions in which there are clear market failures where you could make an argument for government intervention. You think of an example of dumping schemes to stop native refinement capacity for critical minerals, for example. When it comes to the rest of what we do, and I'm not trying to be glib with this, I'm putting my money behind the United States, which is innovative and has everybody looking out for their own interest for profit motive, which is what capitalism is all about. You have incentives for people to act. You draw the best talent you can. And it is worth noting that even though there are nuclear power plants being developed in China, and that's true, the United States has a multiplicity of different designs, everybody vying to get the best possible reactor design. That is what's going to drive long-term success, to have all of these different reactors being developed. And you say, how do you do it for open society? The answer is free people need to have solidity in their contracts. They need to know that their counterparties will honor their agreements. They have to have law and order. They have to have stable regulatory rules that are predictable, and you know exactly where things are going to go. So if you file on day one, you know that you're going to get a response by day X. And as long as those conditions are set up and they're maintained and held, and there's no vacillation or change, then you are going to see flourishing in an industry like this one, because it is primed to go, and we're on the verge of a real acceleration of deployment.
Unless you're competing with people who are willing to sell at a loss. And it seems like China, for example, in rare earth metal processing and refinement and things like this, they were willing to do that just to dominate the market. And now we've kind of seen that playbook, and I worry, frankly, for our ability. I mean, you're a great company, and you're one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. I'm sure you'll think of something, but it's a unique challenge.
Well, I think with the rare earths, not only were they maybe, are they subsidizing that and trying to push that out to the world? Sure. But the U.S. was also making it nearly impossible to do mining in the country. So, how are we supposed to compete when they have the gas and then we have the brake? So, and then you look at space launch, same thing. The U.S. was way behind. And then you get one company that's just insanely driven, pushing as hard as they possibly can. Majority of the world's launching capacity is now SpaceX, not China, even though they were subsidizing their capabilities. So I think it's going to be the same story in all these different industries. U.S. innovation, capitalism pushing as hard as it can without a huge break, slowing it down, beats any centralized sort of, single-threaded effort, even with a ton of funding.
Secretary Danley, we just have a couple minutes left. I'm wondering, what is something that people misunderstand about either the government or working with the government that you wish they understood the truth of?
You mean specific in the nuclear industry? Not a lot. We're pretty well cooperative with most of the companies that are out there. If anybody disagrees, give me a call and complain. I'm happy to take gripes if you have them. But we partner very robustly with them. The one thing is, to the extent to which you want to participate, under Secretary Wright, this department is very open. And if you simply want to call, his name is Ted. He's the Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy. Give Ted a call, and he will happily take it, and he will talk about whatever you want if you want to be part of. So we have a second iteration for this prototyping program, the Launchpad. Anybody who is in the industry that wants to get involved in it, they have an open invitation. We will provide similar security and protections and regulatory oversight for any further designs that people have. The truth is, when we see the first set of these reactor designs go critical and be given the approval by the DOE, and then they get funneled into the NRC process, that's going to drive more innovation too. And we are basically open for business, and anybody who wants to talk to us can. I think sometimes in various fields there's a little bit of hesitation because these are, you know, big institutions and you don't necessarily know how to enter them. The answer is you just look up the phone number for the office on the website and you call.
Okay. Yeah. I think that was it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.